Welcome back, everyone, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. You all are in for a treat today. My amazing guest not only is a mom, she's a writer, a teacher, and she happens to also have a daughter with Down syndrome. And so, Amy Julia, I am so thrilled that you are joining us today on the podcast. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, I'm really thrilled to be here too. I've loved getting to know a little bit about Support Now, and it's just fun to be able to feel like I'm kind of talking both with you and your audience. It's awesome.
Thank you. You know, part of the reason why I love this podcast so much is um, it's hard for people often to see themselves in someone else, so a lot of our followers, a lot of our families that we support, they have children with disability, and they talk about a disability or, a major diagnosis. And they often talk to me about how they feel like no one really understands their experience. It's so different than having, a mainstream child or someone that doesn't have an illness. And so I always love to shine a light on incredible women, incredible moms that have navigated what it's like to have a child that maybe doesn't look or act or kind of fit traditional social norms. So I would love to start out by just you sharing a little bit more about your own experience and what kind of took you down this path of becoming really an expert in all of these topics, from, giving birth to a child with disability and some of the limitations that come with having a child with these limitations.
Yeah. So, Penny is now 19 and she's our oldest daughter. So we have three kids. Penny's our oldest. So, it's an unusual circumstance in some ways to be 28 years old and have a child with Down syndrome. It's unusual for anyone to have a child with Down syndrome, but you kind of associate, and there are higher chances of having a child with Down syndrome when you're older. So we were kind of introduced to parenting through this unexpected diagnosis, which at first felt like a really, really hard, scary, uncertain, and grievous thing, actually. Over time, we came to believe this was a really tremendous gift, not only for our family, but for everyone who got to know Penny, because she's wonderful. And also because having a child with an intellectual disability caused us to just really ask a ton of questions about who we are. And it taught us her presence in our life as an unexpected gift helped us to actually begin to see our other kids that way too. So even though they're typically developing boy and a girl, kind of like, you would expect them to become X, Y, and Z. I think having Penny first helped us to actually say, who are our children, each of them, in their unique particularities? What are each of their limitations? What are the possibilities for each of them? I don't know. It just felt like it really changed parenting for all three of them, that Penny came first and that she had Down syndrome, and that was both, as I said, hard, but also like it really opened us up to a different way of being in the world.
I want to ask you, you talked about there being a layer of grief at the beginning. Do you recall that feeling? When did you find out that she would be born with Down syndrome? Did you find out when she arrived? And then kind of like walk or talk me through the stages that you went through.
Yeah, so we had a prenatal blood screen. This is the screening is very different now than it was 20 years ago, but that indicated that our baby had a 1 in 313 chance of having Down syndrome, which does not seem very high. But for my age group, it should have come out as a 1 in 1,000 chance. So it was like, that's a little strange. We did what was called a level 2 ultrasound, so just a higher resolution ultrasound. I opted not to have an amniocentesis because, again, the chances of her having Down syndrome seemed very low. And I also knew that we would not make a choice to terminate the pregnancy. So it was like, okay, we don't need that information. So the ultrasound technicians said something she probably shouldn't have, which was, this child may be many things, but she does not have Down syndrome. And so we kind of went through the pregnancy being like, all right, well, we crossed one thing off the list. Like, who knows, what's going to happen, but we know that much. So when we gave birth, I was almost 3 weeks early, which again was a little bit surprising, but, within the realm of typical birth giving, labor times or whatever. And she was little. She was 5 pounds, 5 ounces. But she was early. I was little. Like, I am a small person. So, and she got an 8 out of 10 on her APGAR. that said, my mom was actually there for the delivery, and I'm one of 4 children, and my mom was like, "No, her body was different." Like, my mom knew immediately that something was different about this child, but she didn't say anything. And I guess it was about 2 hours later that a nurse came in and called my husband out of the room. And again, I was just, like, eating ice cream or something, just like, "Ah, I'm blissfully happy that I just gave birth." And then he came back in with tears in his eyes and said, "The doctors suspect that Penny has Down syndrome." So he was called into literally a storage closet with a nurse and a doctor who wouldn't look him in the eye. And so I do think some of the grief and fear and sense of like confusion that we experienced was even primed by that, right? Like when you have a doctor who can't look you in the eye and you're called into a closet to talk about your child, without your wife, like, oh, we can't even tell your wife this. You got to go do it. It all felt very like urgent and terrible. As it happened, again, Penny was healthy. She came home from the hospital 2 days later. We had lots of concerns, but also just had a baby who was like nursing and pooping and eating. And that's not always how things go, but that's how it went for us. And I would say it took about a year of going through these waves of that kind of anger, fear, confusion, grief, and unbelievable love, gratitude, and joy until I realized that I had been grieving a hypothetical child. So the child I thought I was having had never existed. So once I had actually grieved the loss of my expectations, I realized again I hadn't actually lost a child. That's a whole different grief. It felt a lot like I had because I had built up in my mind who I thought this child would be. But once I was able to kind of realize that and receive Penny as the gift of the child we had always been given, that changed things a lot for me.
I think the scene that you painted of your husband finding out about the disability, it's so easy to see. It almost like the way you're describing it is it's almost like it was a punishment. Like, like the shame of
Yeah.
like pulling someone aside in a dark room and making it feel like
Yeah.
it's this horrible thing and it should be quiet. And I can imagine, yeah, it's like the diagnosis is rooted in how that information was delivered versus a more open conversation around this is the reality of your situation. You will be fine, but it will look different. And that's a really interesting way of talking about how traumatic that was for your husband and therefore for you, because you immediately feel like you're kind of put off to the side, that this isn't something we're going to talk about. This isn't something that we're going to embrace. And so I appreciate kind of that, like you painting that picture, because I can so vividly see what you're talking about. And I would hope that 20 years later, we've progressed in that way. I don't know. I'm sure it varies person to person, hospital to hospital. The other question, though, I wanted to ask you, like more specifically, is, how long did it take for you to get to the place of accepting Penny the way Penny was? Was that 6 months? Was that 9 months? Was that 2 years?
It's a great question. So I did, my first book is called A Good and Perfect Gift. And it really is like a spiritual memoir about really the first 2 to 3 years of Penny's life, and it's interesting to look back on it because on some level, I would say a year after she was born was we had her baptized a year after she was born. And I remembered like the day in the hospital, we had some friends who came and they brought a bottle of champagne. And I literally was like, I cannot open a bottle of champagne. And then at her baptism, which was like, she was like 11 months old, I was like, it is time to open that bottle of champagne. Like I'm celebrating this child. So I know it kind of happened in that time frame. And I know for some people it takes much longer than that. And for others, Peter would actually say he went into like the deepest darkness he's ever experienced for about 2 days. And then was done. And it was like mine got drawn out over the course of a year. So I do think for anyone who's in an experience like this and still is experiencing that degree of grief, it's like, yeah, it can take a really long time. It also can be really intense and really quick and being gracious with ourselves and each other. But for me, I would say that it was about a year. At the same time, I have found that throughout Penny's life, transition moments are very scary for me. And so I don't know that they're filled with grief actually, but they bring me back to the hospital in the amount of fear I feel about the future when she was going to kindergarten, when she was going to middle school. Right now, we just went through the transition from high school into a college program. And those are the times when I get like the anxiety and fear about the future. And I have to remember one thing that happened again, early days was when Penny was in the room with us, we were not afraid and we were not grieving and we were not angry. I mean, we were just like delighted with this child because here she is right now. And so that is what I continue to do, even 20 years later, is remind myself of who she is right now and that she is safe and well and, flourishing right now. So I doesn't mean that I'm not afraid of the future ever, but it does mean that I can try to hold on to that love and connection and purpose and beauty as like the grounding force of our family rather than letting the fear be that.
Well, and I think that's just a great parenting mom tip overall. There's a lot of people, whether you have a perfectly healthy baby or not, that scare moms into saying, "Oh, you just wait. You just wait
Yes,
until they turn 2. You just wait until the terrible 3s. You just wait until they're teenagers." And it's a really bad habit that a lot of women tend to like slip into. And it's like, why do we do that? Why can we not just be in a good place, whether that's the good or the hard, and just let someone experience that moment for what it is? Because no one can predict the challenges and the opportunities that arise in the future.
totally. Yeah, no, I find that so much. I have 3 teenagers now and I love it. And I try to tell people all the time. I'm like, "It's great. I love being a parent of teenagers." And that doesn't mean that we don't have like really hard days or really big kids, big problems. It's like not that that's not a part of our life, but at the same time like they are wonderful human beings and I get to be a part of watching them grow up and helping them figure out who they are, and that is awesome.
So, Amy Julia, tell me a little bit more as you were coming around to the acceptance of Penny and what this life could be. What was it like socially for you? What was it like to be a mom knowing that your kid was going to be different than a lot of your other friends' children, or maybe it wasn't? So, just talk to me a little bit more about how you navigated that.
Yeah, I mean, that's also kind of an ongoing story, that has been hard and good over the course of 20 years. I think in the beginning, I was very stuck on developmental charts. And I think this is another thing that, doctors are trying to serve us well. And so are teachers by having milestones and measurements, and they really can be used in a helpful way. They also set up such a sense of comparison and like whether you have a quote unquote good kid or whether you're being a good mom. And so that sense of comparison of like, she's not hitting her milestones, or oh my gosh, even just being in a room with other children where they're running and she's still not crawling. And I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? There's a lot of fear and shame that can come there. So I really had to do a lot of work because it wasn't just that I didn't want to feel kind of sad or jealous about, you know, other children in comparison to Penny. I also wanted to be able to celebrate. I wanted to be able to celebrate my kid. I wanted to be able to celebrate their kid. And I also didn't want, I think another thing we do is where, like, I remember one time feeling kind of resentful that none of my friends knew the way to the children's hospital in our area. I'm like, I know it by heart because I have been there for just specialist appointments, not because Penny was like super sick, but had been there so many times. And that kind of that sense of like, nobody knows how hard I have it. And I was like, gosh, I want to have compassion for my friend when she has simply had a hard night because her baby was up 3 times, instead of being like, yeah, well, you don't know the way to the children's hospital. And I want them to have compassion for me and not feel like I'm inaccessible because I have this different experience. So, anyway, that definitely, similarly, it probably took a year or 2 for me to think that through, and the way I thought it through was actually had to do with identity. Like, if my identity and my daughter's identity comes from being a beloved human being who's been created with a purpose, then that allows me to let her be who she is and let other kids be who they are with compassion and celebration. If her identity comes from her abilities, and if that's true for me, and if that's true for every kid I meet, then we will always be in this place of like jealousy, judgment, comparison, and trying to measure up. But again, so the thinking came in the first couple of years. The like living it out and actually experiencing that sense of like compassion and celebration just took longer for that to kind of, transfer into our lives. And there still are times where I will get a little bit of a pit in my stomach just as far as like, is, is Penny going to be okay again in comparison to other people? And I can come back to that sense of belovedness and usually get myself there pretty easily.
I think that's such a beautiful reminder too, not just as parents, but as people. Like this is the slippery slope that we all tend to find ourselves in. I think especially moms, where you just always feel like you're comparing yourself to your neighbor or to the friend down the street, because, and I think especially more now with social media, there's just more pressure to feel like you have it all together, that you're going on the right trips and you're doing the right things for your kids and that they have the right clothes. I mean, that's something real on an individual level, not just on a parenting mom level. The other thing that you said that I think I'd love for you to elaborate on is, how open were you with your friends and family about how you were feeling? It sounds like you had this like really solid and mature and developed perspective. Was that something that you shared with your friends and family so that they better understood how to interact with you? Like, because I think part of what I want someone who, let's say a mom just found out that, their child is going to be born with Down syndrome. It is scary because no one knows exactly what to do. As a supporter, you're not really sure what to do. So what is your advice in terms of like kind of teaching your community how to act and how to behave and how to respond?
We felt really early on that we wanted to kind of normalize Down syndrome. Like it's it's kind of a word like cancer or, where people are like, am I allowed to say that? And so we would, when people came over, we'd be like, here's Penny, she has Down syndrome. Like that's a little bit not what we would say, but like we'd try to bring it up and be like, oh, did you know that this is true about kids with Down syndrome? And just trying to kind of normalize it within family and friends and tell them the things that we didn't know so that they also felt like free to ask questions and not like I'm supposed to know all these things. So we really tried to give ourselves and others permission to be curious for the sake of relationship. That said, I think on the feeling side of things, it's funny because, again, a couple of my friends read the book I wrote, which came out when Penny was 5, and they were like, I had no idea you were going through that. And I don't think I was trying to hold it back from them. I think I just like tend to journal my things out, my feelings before. It just takes a long time for me to be able to be like, oh, that's what was going on. So that was hard for me to do in the moment. And part of it was a feeling, and I have had this along the way, and I would suspect that some of your listeners have had this experience too, where I remember this happening a lot when Penny was in middle school. Friendships were really hard. And I brought that up with a couple of friends, and they were like, oh, yeah, friendships are so hard in middle school for all girls. And I was like, no, I'm talking about like never being invited over to anyone's house. That's not what's happening with your daughter. And obviously, I'm not going to get in a fight with you about that. And I'm not looking for your pity. But I also feel like this kind of false comparison thing happening to try to make me feel better doesn't. And what actually would feel better is if you were like, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry that that is what she's going through. I mean, that's what I needed much more than a like, oh yeah, everybody's daughter's having a hard time. And it's like, well, that's kind of true. And guess what? This is particularly hard. So yeah, so my advice I think would be that the more we can normalize and be honest with our friends, the better. At the same time, there is such a need for anyone who has a hard diagnosis or a situation that's unexpected like this to have support of people in that actual community. So, like, I have my mom's friends who have kids with Down syndrome. I also have lots of mom friends who have typically developing kids. I think both are really crucial. But for anyone who's feeling that sense of like, I'm alone, it's like, if you can find someone else, whether that's in person or online, to say, yeah, I know what that feels like. I'm sorry you're dealing with that right now. It helps a lot.
When did you decide along this path that you wanted to embrace this fully and that you wanted to write books and you wanted to create curriculum and education around this? Did that come immediately? Was that instinctive, or was there something that triggered that for you?
Kind of both. Like and in the sense that I remember my mother, she came down for overnight once a week for years. And there were days in the first year of Penny's life where she would say to me, I want you to either go take a nap or write in your journal. Like she knew that the way she could be my mom was either to have me go write and at that point I wasn't writing for any sort of like publication. And then at the same time, a friend of mine said, "Can I start a blog on your behalf?" And I was like, "I don't even know what a blog is, but sure." And she's like, "Because I just know we want updates, and I don't want you to have to be emailing us all the time. So if once a month, once a week, whatever." So I started this blog just for family and friends to give them updates, and eventually people started sharing that. It was kind of, and again, pre-social media by a couple of years, but that got me writing. And so eventually I was in a conversation with a literary agent who was like, if you ever wanted to write a book, and by this point, Penny was about 3, and I was like, I am on the other side. Like there is an arc to this story and it ends in a good place. And so that was what really, yeah, got me to write the book. It's actually now, many years later, I've started this class that you mentioned called Reimagining Family Life with Disability. That took a lot longer because I needed to go through 19 years of family life with disability in order to have things where I could say, no, I feel confident that like this actually works. And it's not just about Down syndrome and it's not just about my family, because I've met so many other people and I have done so much reading and thinking about this. And so now we have something to offer that's not just my story, but that's actually some like more principles of how to navigate family life with hope and a sense of purpose.
I mean, I can't leave this podcast without asking also about your other children. How have you navigated their own journey and making sense of all of this, and what has that been like? Knowing that they won't have the same experience Penny will, but also making sure that you're balancing your time, and attention, and love, and all of the things that are already hard for moms, but certainly a little bit harder when you have one that just naturally requires more attention.
Yeah. Yeah, our youngest daughter has had the hardest time, and she's expressed it very in loving, wonderful ways throughout the years with the amount of time, whether it's doctor's appointments or even just, both of my younger kids have had many more opportunities for like carpools than Penny has. And so it's like I'm driving her and putting Marilee in the car with somebody else to go somewhere, and that to her feels like you're not loving me as much. We've again tried to be really honest about it and kind of name the reality along the way. One of the things I said to her a lot when she was little was just that just because you don't get the same amount of time doesn't mean you don't have the same amount of love for me. She didn't think that was very satisfying. And so then it was trying to actually do some very special, like, okay, well, then I'm going to pull you aside and we're going to go on a little trip together. Or even just there was, once she got to middle school, she could take the bus to school, and we needed to drive Penny. And to her, that just felt like this tremendous indignity. Like, you clearly care more about Penny because you're driving her. And so I was like, okay, I'll drive you to school. Like, I will take the 20 minutes, and it feels a little silly to me, and you could get on the bus, but it wasn't for her. It was like, do you really love me? Will you really give me time? I will say for both of our kids, having a sister with a disability, an intellectual disability, has been tremendously eye-opening for them. As far as, I mean, they are kind, they are compassionate, they think about why people might not be able to, whether it's like control their impulses or looking for the gifts that people have that are not typically visible. So they have benefited a lot from having the sister they have as kids who otherwise are pretty kind of high powered, high achieving, to have someone in their life who slows them down and helps them laugh at themselves when they make a mistake instead of just get furious, and who again brings us all back to that sense of belovedness rather than performance. It's a real gift to all of us, but it has been challenging to balance all the things you said. And the best we have found is just to be honest about that and to try to allow them the feelings of resentment or jealousy, and to underscore the fact that they are all so loved by us, even if we can't show it to each of them in exactly the same way.
And I would imagine it's going to be so rewarding as they get older, and as your two other children, as they mature and understand really like how challenging the situation was or is for you and your husband to do, as one day, hopefully, when your kids become parents, they still don't yet have that full
Right.
perspective on everything. You can't expect your children to have the same maturity as you do in this role that can kind of see everything, that can see the forest, not the individual trees. And I just think the advice of not shaming your children for not being at that level of maturity yet to understand, it's like, you're being so unreasonable. It's like, well, part of the reason why they're being unreasonable is like, they just don't have that perspective yet. They can't. They're still going through life. But it sounds like you've set such a solid foundation of trust and transparency that over time, their belief and frankly, their just compassion and respect for you and your husband, I would imagine will just continue to grow and grow and grow as they evolve into adults, into the real world. My family often says you give them roots and you give them wings, and that's really all you can do. And you just have to hope that they come out on the other side as good human beings, that as you have so mentioned a couple of times here, where they understand the world, that where everyone belongs. Before we like officially wrap up, what are your dreams for Penny?
It's a great question. I think my dreams for her are mostly relational, just that other people would see the gift that she is and want her in their lives. And so that think long term, she would like to live outside of our house. I don't ever say live independently in the sense that I think all of us are interdependent. Like, I don't live independently and I don't want to. I want to live with other people who support me in my life, but she does not want to live with her parents forever. So a big dream would be for her to be able to live in an apartment or a house with friends, and have a meaningful employment, and ways to be involved in the community, not just kind of being served by her community, but having purposeful ways that she can volunteer and participate in community life. So it's a pretty basic set of dreams, but also ones that are increasingly possible for people with Down syndrome, and that hasn't always been the case. So I'm really grateful to live where we live and when we live, in terms of those opportunities. And I think our culture is starting to have an imagination for people with intellectual disabilities that is a little bit more expansive. And I hope that we get to be a part of seeing that happen in Penny's life.
Yeah, well, you're going to be a huge part of the reason when that happens, and just bringing awareness and accessibility in terms of not just physical accessibility, but spiritual, mental, emotional accessibility of the general population, understanding these kiddos, understanding these people as people, even if they don't necessarily work and function in the way that you may typically interact with. Amy Julia, you must tell everyone, where can they find you? Where can they read your books? Where can they find out more about, again, this incredible content that you're putting out there? You are such an inspiration, because to your point, you have the kind of like now this like rear view mirror perspective, and certainly 19 isn't the end. And you are further along in your journey. You have kind of gotten through a lot of adolescence and some of the phases that I think are really scary to people.
Yeah.
So where can they find out more about you and your great work?
Well, amyjuliabecker.com kind of holds all of it. And I would love for people to go there. I'll mention a couple of things. I think I mentioned that I run a workshop called Reimagining Family Life with Disability. So I've got some videos online that go along with that course and a workbook, but also sometimes teach that live depending on where you live. And I'm on social media, Amy Julia Becker. It's pretty easy to search. And I do have a podcast called Reimagining the Good Life. And then as far as the books, they're all on Amazon. You can find them on the website. But A Good and Perfect Gift is probably the one most relevant to the conversation we just had. My most recent book is called To Be Made Well, and it's looking at kind of the physical, social, spiritual, and emotional and communal aspects of healing and what it looks like to be made well, not just personally, but as a society.
Well, thank you, Amy Julia. I am so grateful for this conversation today. Again, I know that there are many people, whether it's a Down syndrome diagnosis, disability, or something along those lines, it doesn't really matter. I think that so much of the advice that you give is for moms in general, in terms of kind of slowing down, not being so quick to judge, to compare, and just ultimately creating a more better human beings around the world that are more accepting of each other. So thank you for joining us today. I look forward to many more conversations with you.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.